morning they fired me, I had exactly 23 hours left to wait. 23 hours until the largest bonus payment in the company's history would land in my account, $7.2 million. I had spent 4 years earning every single cent of it, but the moment I sat down in that leather chair across from my supervisor, I already knew what was coming. I also knew something they didn't, and that knowledge made me the calmest person in the building. If you enjoy dramatic stories like this, make sure to subscribe to Francisko's Stories for more. New stories drop every week, and trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next. Let me take you back to the beginning, because none of this makes sense without it. My name is Daniel, and 4 years before that morning, I walked into the headquarters of Meridian Capital Group, carrying nothing but a laptop bag and a contract I had read 14 times. Meridian was a mid-sized financial technology company. They had the ambition of a giant, but the discipline of a startup. They built software for institutional investors, the kind of platforms that move billions of dollars with a single click. Smart people worked there, ruthless people too, and I was about to become one of the most important hires they had ever made. I was brought in to lead a project they called internally the Titan Initiative. The idea was simple on the surface: rebuild their entire core trading infrastructure from scratch, replace a 20-year-old system that crashed twice a year, lost data regularly, and terrified every client they had. The new system would be faster, more secure, and capable of handling 10 times the transaction volume. If it worked, Meridian would be able to compete with firms 3 times their size. If it failed, the company would likely lose its 2 largest clients and face regulatory action. No pressure. My compensation package reflected that pressure. My base salary was generous, but the real money was tied to the project. The contract stated clearly that upon successful completion and full client adoption of the Titan platform, I would receive a performance bonus equal to 2% of the projected 5-year revenue increase attributed to the new system. The finance team had modeled that number carefully. 2% of the projected increase came out to $7.2 million. It was written into the contract in plain language. Signed by me, signed by the CEO, signed by the head of HR, and witnessed by 2 attorneys. I remember the day I signed it. The CEO, a man named Gerald Holt, shook my hand across the conference table and said, "Daniel, if you pull this off, you'll never have to work another day in your life." I believed him. That was my first mistake. Not the last, but the first. The next 4 years were the hardest of my life. I want you to understand what it actually took to build the Titan system. I'm not going to bore you with technical details. What I will tell you is this: I worked an average of 65 hours a week for 4 straight years. I missed my brother's wedding because we had a critical server migration scheduled that weekend, and I was the only person who fully understood the architecture. I missed Christmas with my family twice. I went through a relationship that ended largely because my partner said, and I will never forget this, "You are married to that company, Daniel. I'm just the person you sleep next to." She was not wrong, but I kept going because I believed in what we were building, and because I trusted that contract. The team I assembled was extraordinary: 15 engineers, 3 project managers, 2 security specialists, and 1 absolutely relentless quality assurance lead named Priya, who found bugs that no one else could see. We fought constantly, in the best way. We pushed each other. We built something that genuinely worked. The Titan platform launched in a controlled pilot 18 months in. Our first major client, a pension fund managing over $40 billion in assets, ran it alongside their old system for 6 months. At the end of those 6 months, their operations director sent Gerald Holt a letter. I saw a copy of it. The letter said, in part, that the Titan platform had reduced their transaction error rate by 91% and cut their processing time in half. They wanted full migration immediately. Word spread. The second major client followed. Then a third approached us. By the end of year 3, Meridian had signed 2 new institutional clients directly because of Titan. Revenue was growing faster than even the optimistic projections. The finance team revised their 5-year model upward. That revision meant my bonus calculation was, if anything, conservative. Gerald Holt called me into his office after the second new client signed and said, "Daniel, you've changed this company. I want you to know that." I thanked him. I nodded. I went back to work. What I did not know was that in the months that followed, Gerald Holt began having a very different kind of conversation, not with me, with his board of directors and with the company's general counsel, a sharp and cold woman named Margaret Voss. I started noticing things about 8 months before the bonus was due. Small things at first, the kind of things you dismiss when you are busy and tired. Gerald stopped dropping by the engineering floor. My project updates, which used to get a personal reply from him within hours, started going to his assistant instead. A reorganization was announced. 3 of the executives I had worked most closely with were reassigned to different divisions. One of them, a VP named Tom Chen, who had been one of my strongest allies, quietly resigned and left the company entirely. I ran into Tom at a coffee shop about a month after he left. I asked him why he had gone. He looked at me with an expression I could not quite read, and then he said, "Daniel, I'm going to give you one piece of advice. Go read your contract again. Every word of it, especially the sections you think you already understand." I laughed. I told him I knew my contract cold. He just looked at me and said, "Read it again." I thought about that conversation for a week. Then I called my personal attorney, a woman named Sandra Park, who had reviewed the contract when I first signed it. I asked her to pull it out and go through it with me again from the beginning. We scheduled a call for a Saturday morning. She had the document open in front of her. I had my copy. We started reading. We got to section 12, subsection 4, paragraph 3. Sandra stopped talking mid-sentence. I said, "What?" She said, "Give me a moment." She was quiet for almost a full minute. Then she said, "Daniel, did you read this clause when you signed?" I told her I had read the entire contract. She said, "Did you specifically read this clause?" And she read it to me aloud. The clause stated that in the event of termination of the employee's contract by the company within 30 days of a scheduled performance bonus payment date, the company would be liable for the full bonus amount, plus a contractual penalty equal to 50% of that amount, paid within 15 business days of termination. I did not fully process it at first. I asked her to read it again. She did. $7.2 million plus 50%. That came to $10.8 million, payable within 15 business days if they fired me within 30 days of the bonus date. Sandra said very quietly, "Daniel, I want to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. Do you have any reason to believe the company might attempt to terminate your employment before the bonus payment date?" I thought about Tom Chen. I thought about Gerald Holt's assistant. I thought about the reorganization and the executives who had disappeared. I thought about the way the entire tone of my professional life had shifted in the past several months, like a slow change in weather that you only notice after the storm has already started. I said, "Yes, I think they might try." Sandra said, "Then here is what we are going to do." Over the next 6 months, Sandra and I prepared quietly and carefully. She engaged a specialist employment attorney named Richard Falk, who had spent 20 years handling exactly these kinds of corporate bonus disputes. Richard was calm and methodical and thorough in a way that made me feel, for the first time in a long time, that I was not alone. Richard reviewed the contract in full. His assessment was unambiguous. The clause was valid. It had been drafted by Meridian's own legal team. It had been reviewed and signed by the CEO and by the head of HR. It was enforceable. And because the bonus payment date was a specific calendar date written directly into the contract, the 30-day window was absolutely clear. If Meridian fired me any time after a date that was now less than 7 months away, they would owe me $10.8 million within 15 business days. Richard said, "The question is whether they know about this clause." I said I didn't know. He said, "If they don't, they may simply be planning a quiet termination to avoid the $7.2 million. They may not realize they've written a much larger penalty into their own contract." I said, "And if they do know," he said, "then they're counting on you not knowing or not having the resources to fight them." Either way, the plan was the same. Document everything. Stay calm. Do not tip my hand. And wait. Those final 6 months were the strangest of my career. I showed up every day. I did my work. I stayed professional. I answered emails and attended meetings and mentored the junior engineers on my team. I acted exactly as I always had. On the inside, I was watching everything with a level of attention that felt almost cinematic. I noticed who was in meetings I was not invited to. I noticed when HR sent a routine paperwork request that was slightly outside the normal schedule. I noticed when the general counsel, Margaret Voss, began attending executive meetings that she had never attended before. Priya, my QA lead, pulled me aside one afternoon in the kitchen and said, "Something is off. Do you feel it?" I said I did. She said, "What are you going to do?" I said, "Nothing, not yet." She looked at me for a long moment and then she said, "You already know something, don't you?" I smiled. I told her to keep doing her job and not to worry. 3 weeks before the bonus payment date, Gerald Holt called a company-wide meeting. He stood at the front of the main conference room and announced with great warmth and apparent sincerity that Meridian Capital Group was entering an exciting new phase of strategic transformation. He used a lot of words that meant nothing. He praised the work of the entire organization. He did not mention Titan by name. He did not mention me by name. After the meeting, my direct supervisor, a man named Craig Weston, asked me to stay behind. Craig was not a bad man, exactly. He was a man who had learned that survival in that building meant doing what he was told and not thinking too hard about the consequences for other people. He was in his mid-50s. He had a mortgage and 2 kids in college. He looked at me across the empty conference table with the expression of a man who is genuinely sorry about something, but has decided that being sorry is enough. He said, "Daniel, I want you to know that I think you've done incredible work here." I said, "Thank you, Craig." He said, "The company is going through some changes. There's going to be a restructuring of the technology leadership team." I said, "I see." He said, "Your role is going to be eliminated. Effective immediately." And there it was, 23 hours before my bonus payment date, not 30 days before, not a week before, 23 hours before. I looked at Craig for a moment. I thought about everything, the 4 years, the 65-hour weeks, my brother's wedding, the 2 Christmases, the relationship I had lost, the coffee shop conversation with Tom Chen, the Saturday morning call with Sandra, the 6 months of quiet, careful preparation, the clause in Section 12, subsection 4, paragraph 3. I said, "Okay." Craig blinked. He had clearly expected something else. I said, "I understand. What do I need to sign?" He said, "HR will walk you through the paperwork. There's a severance package." I said, "That's fine." I stood up. I shook his hand. I thanked him for the opportunity to work at Meridian. I walked out of the conference room with my laptop bag over my shoulder and my phone in my pocket, and I sent a single text message to Richard Falk. The message said, "It happened. 23 hours out. Start the clock." The HR exit process took about 40 minutes. The HR director was a woman named Janet Lowry. She was professional and brisk and clearly operating from a script. She handed me a stack of documents and walked me through each one. Standard non-disclosure agreement, standard non-disparagement clause, a severance offer of 6 months' salary. I signed the documents she needed me to sign that day. The severance offer I set aside. Janet said, "You can take time to review the severance before deciding." I said, "I know." She said, "Is there anything you'd like to ask me today?" I said, "No, I think I have everything I need." And I meant that in a way she did not understand. I handed over my access badge. I said goodbye to the receptionist, a young woman named Layla, who had always greeted me with genuine warmth every single morning for 4 years. I walked out through the glass front doors into the afternoon light. I did not look back. Richard Falk sent the letter the following morning. It was addressed to Margaret Voss, the general counsel, and to Gerald Holt directly. It was 7 pages long. It was extremely precise. It cited the contract in full. It referenced Section 12, subsection 4, paragraph 3 in its entirety. It calculated the total liability, $7.2 million in the base bonus, plus 50% as the contractual penalty, for a total of $10.8 million, payable within 15 business days of termination. It also noted that the termination had occurred 23 hours before the scheduled bonus payment date, placing it firmly within the 30-day window specified in the clause. Richard told me later that he had received a response within 4 hours. Not from Margaret Voss. From a senior partner at the outside law firm Meridian retained for major disputes. A firm that charged, Richard told me with a slight smile, roughly $900 an hour. The response was aggressive. It argued that the termination had been a legitimate restructuring. It argued that the performance conditions for the bonus had not been fully met under the company's interpretation of the contract. It questioned the calculation methodology. It suggested that the clause itself was ambiguous. Richard sent a reply the same afternoon. His reply was 22 pages long. It included signed client adoption documentation, revenue reports, the letter from the pension fund's operations director, internal Meridian financial projections, and a legal analysis of every argument their outside counsel had made. Each argument was addressed directly and dismantled methodically. The reply concluded with one sentence: "We anticipate your prompt compliance with the contractual obligation, or we will proceed immediately to litigation." I did not hear anything for 3 days. Then Richard called me. He said, "Daniel, I just got off the phone with their general counsel." I said, "And?" He said, "She wants to know if you're open to a settlement discussion." I said, "What kind of discussion?" He said, "The kind where they would very much prefer not to go to court." I found out later, through channels I will not fully describe, what happened inside Meridian's executive floor in the days after that letter arrived. Gerald Holt had convened an emergency meeting with Margaret Voss, the CFO, and 2 senior partners from the outside law firm. The meeting had lasted 3 hours. At some point during that meeting, Margaret Voss had pulled up the original contract on her laptop and read Section 12, Subsection 4, Paragraph 3 aloud to the room. By all accounts, the room went very quiet. The CFO, a man named Paul Greer, had then asked a question that no one in the room could immediately answer. He asked who had drafted that clause. Margaret Voss said it had been drafted by her predecessor, an attorney who had left the company 2 years ago. The clause had been intended apparently as a standard executive protection provision, one that Meridian's legal team had included in a handful of senior contracts and then largely forgotten. No one had flagged it during the termination planning. No one had pulled the full contract and reviewed it before Gerald Holt gave Craig Weston the instruction. No one had seen it coming. Gerald Holt reportedly said, at some point in that meeting, "How did we miss this?" And apparently the room had no good answer for him. The outside law firm's assessment was direct. The clause was valid. The termination timing was indisputable. The documentation supporting the bonus calculation was extensive. A court would almost certainly enforce it. And if it went to litigation, there was a significant risk of additional damages, legal fees, and the kind of public attention that institutional finance clients do not enjoy seeing their software vendors receive. The recommendation from the outside firm was to settle. The settlement negotiation took 11 days. I will not pretend it was easy. There were moments when Meridian's attorneys pushed hard on the bonus calculation itself, arguing that the revenue attributed to Titan should be measured differently. Richard pushed back every time with documentation. There were moments when they tried to include settlement terms that would have required me to remain silent about the circumstances of my termination. Richard rejected those terms. In the end, we settled for $10.4 million. Not the full 10.8. I accepted a small reduction in exchange for a faster payment timeline and a mutual non-disparagement agreement that applied to both parties equally. Richard advised me that the reduction was worth it. I agreed with him. $10.4 million, received in full within 12 business days of signing. The wire transfer arrived on a Thursday morning. I was sitting in Sandra's office when it cleared. She turned her laptop around so I could see the confirmation. Neither of us said anything for a moment. Then she said, "You did it." I said, "We did it." She smiled. She said, "Go get some rest. You've earned it." I want to tell you about the last conversation I had with anyone from Meridian. About 2 weeks after the settlement, I received a phone call from Craig Weston. Not an official call, a personal one from his cell phone on a Sunday afternoon. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Craig said, "Daniel, I just wanted to call." I said, "Okay." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I didn't know about the clause. I want you to know that. I was just told to do it, and I did it. I didn't know what it would cost them, or what it would do to you." I believed him. Craig was not the architect of what happened. He was just the person they sent to deliver the message, a tool used by people who thought they were being clever. I said, "Craig, I know that." He said, "I'm sorry, Daniel. I think what they did was wrong." I said, "I think so too." He said, "I heard you came out okay." I said, "I did." He was quiet again. Then he said, "Good. You deserved it. Everything you built for that company, you deserved every cent." I thanked him. We said goodbye. I haven't heard from him since. I want to tell you something about what those 4 years actually cost me beyond the work hours. It cost me a certain kind of innocence about institutions, about the idea that if you work hard and deliver results and operate with integrity, an organization will honor its commitments to you simply because it is the right thing to do. I used to believe that. I no longer do. What I believe now is that a contract is only as strong as your willingness and your ability to enforce it. That corporate loyalty flows upward in most companies, not downward. That the people who make decisions about your compensation are primarily thinking about their own interests, not yours. And that the moment your interests and theirs diverge, you should expect them to act accordingly. I am not saying this to be cynical. I am saying it because knowing these things protects you. Tom Chen knew them. He tried to tell me. I wish I had listened more carefully and acted sooner. The good news is that I had listened just enough to make that call to Sandra, just enough to sit across from Craig Weston in that conference room and remain completely calm because I had already done everything I needed to do. Preparation is the only thing that makes calm possible. I was not calm because I was brave. I was calm because I was ready. In the months after the settlement, I took some time away. I traveled, I slept. I spent time with my family, including my brother, whose wedding I had missed and who forgave me for it with a generosity I did not entirely feel I deserved. I started running again, something I had not done regularly in 3 years. I read books that had nothing to do with technology or finance or business. I reminded myself that I was a person, not just a professional. After about 4 months, I started thinking about what came next. Several companies reached out. Word had spread in the industry, as it always does, that the Titan platform had been built by a specific team under a specific leader. Some of those companies knew the full story. Some of them knew only parts of it. But all of them were interested in what I might do next. I took my time. I'd earned the right to do that. Eventually, I found a project that genuinely excited me. Not because of the compensation, though the compensation was fair, and this time I had a much more experienced legal team review every word of the contract before I signed. What excited me was the problem itself, a healthcare data infrastructure challenge with the potential to actually improve how patient information moves between systems. Harder to quantify than a revenue projection, more meaningful, I thought, than a trading platform. I said yes. I started work on a Monday morning. I walked into a building carrying my laptop bag, the same one I had carried into Meridian 4 years before. The difference was that this time, I understood exactly what I was worth and exactly what I required in exchange for giving my best work to an organization. That understanding, as it turns out, is worth more than any bonus, though the bonus was also very nice. If you take anything from this story, I hope it is this. Read your contracts, all of them, every page, every clause, every subsection, not just when you sign them. Read them again when something changes. Read them when your instincts are telling you that something is off. Pay an attorney to read them with you if you can afford to, because a good attorney will see things you cannot see. And know your worth. Not in an abstract motivational poster kind of way. Know it specifically and concretely. Know what you have built. Know what you have contributed. Keep records. Keep copies. Keep every piece of documentation that supports the value you have created for an organization. Because the day may come when the people across the table from you have decided that your value is something they can take without paying for it. On that day, the only thing standing between you and an outcome that is deeply unfair is your own preparation. I sat in that leather chair across from my supervisor 23 hours before a $7.2 million payment was due. I was calm. I shook his hand. I thanked him for the opportunity. And then I walked out of the building and I let the contract do exactly what contracts are designed to do. That is all. That is the whole story. Thank you for listening.